Yo, what up? It's your man, Nature Dan. And I have returned with my first tier list. This is actually my third take on this. I'm not ashamed to admit it. So the first time I did this, I placed everyone and I explained them as I was placing them. Right? I was placing them as I was going. And it was a really good explanation that I was giving on everything. But funny enough, this goddamn OBS wasn't recording. For some reason, it was paused. I was talking for I don't know, maybe an hour. It was wild actually. I was so in depth. I can continue that, but if I'm trying too hard to redo what I've done, it ain't gonna get done. Anyway, that's enough of the explanation. So this is my very first tier list video. This is an anime antagonist tier list. This tier list is not based off strength. It is based off the influence that this character had on the protagonist, the influence they had on the world that they were in, ultimately the influence they had in the series, and if they had any lasting impact on their series or on me. Honestly, this tier list is completely based off my opinion, as every single tier list will be. And yeah. Right, if I got to do YouTube stuff. So leave a comment if you watch this video, if you hear my thoughts, and if there are anything that you disagree with, or if there are characters that you thought should be here that aren't here, or if you do agree and you just want to let me know. But, hit up that comment section, start a conversation, feel free. We could definitely talk about it. Leave a like on the video if you enjoyed tier lists, and if you thought this was cool to see and in depth, and if you just love anime like I do, subscribe to the channel if you want to support and see it grow. And yeah, that's it. That's everything, right? Yeah, that's everything. All right, cool. So let's begin. Now, you see a lot of characters down here, right? These are all characters from series that I have not seen, so they are not on this list because I don't know them. You might know some of these people. If you do, cool. I'm sure True would know a couple of these guys. The only guy here that I'm confused about is this dude right here. I swear I know him. I swear he's from Berserk. I don't know. I forget. I think his name is Grendel, or there's something with a G. He had a heavy ass name. I know that. But I don't know anybody else down there. So, as I said before, this is all based off influence. This is not based off power. If this was based off power, of course, this tier list would look a lot different. So we're going to start from the bottom and go work our way to the top. As far as in order, the only order is S tier. S tier is in order. Everything else is just placed, right? And I'm not really going to give too much of an explanation outside of S tier and a couple A tier characters. So this is what the tier list look like. If you want to see... Oh, excuse me. But yeah, this is placement. All these placements could be final. I'm not sure. So, starting with the bottom of D tier, Majin Buu. Unimportant. Honestly, what is there to say about this character? Really, if you can think of any reason why he's relevant, I don't even know why his picture is here. Kid Buu or Super Buu would be better. I guess they figured putting Fat Boy would just cover for the other two, but it doesn't. Unimportant. Influence, 0. Importance, 0. Irrelevant. Envy. He's from Full Metal Alchemist. A pawn. That's who he was. He was a pawn. I don't know why he's here. Irrelevant. Kishin. He was the main villain in Soul Eater. In the manga, I haven't read the Soul Eater manga. I did watch the series. In the series, this nigga was he was the goal. The goal was to revive him or whatever. But other than that, he lost extremely anticlimactically, and then that was pretty much it. Meruem. Now you might see this and you might think Meruem should be higher. I think he if there was a lower than D tier, I should probably make an E tier for his ass. But Meruem is in this list for one reason. I put him here just because of the very, very, very light section of character development that he had. All right, so here's the thing about Meruem. He didn't actually have a plan. His plan was not his own. It was his mother's plan. His mother was the one who wanted all these things for him. She gave herself up for him because she knew that he had to eat her in order for her to be born. She was totally fine with that. She wanted that to happen. He was her king. Feel me? So he pops out and he has like a bunch of followers, of course. All the Chimera Ants, they follow him. He is their king, undisputed. Nobody's questioning this. Of course, before he was born, you had Pito, Dopey, and Poof, who were like his heralds. You know, they were like the apex of the Chimera Ants. But like, he didn't really do anything. Like, yeah, he caused a little bit of trouble. Yeah, they had to take him out. But that was just because the Chimera Ants were wilding like as a whole. Like, they were wilding before he was even born. So him being born was just like, I guess you could say it was more of the culmination of all of their thoughts merging into one form. But like, what did he want? He didn't want to take over anything. He didn't even want to be the strongest. Like, what did he really want? He wanted to play fucking shogi with what was Shorty's name? Emogi? Y'all know who I'm talking about. Y'all know exactly who I'm talking about. If you watch Hunter, you know who I'm talking about. All he wanted was to play shogi with her at the end. And like, by the end of the series, he wasn't even really a bad guy anymore. Like, after Netero blew him, after Netero hit him with that fucking kamikaze attack, he was like, he like, they revived him, like Poof and Yopi revived him, and then he was chilling after that. He didn't even want to fight anymore. He was like, yo, y'all niggas just leave. I just want to chill with my shorty at this point, because he had fallen in love with a human, basically. Like, why am I even talking about Meruem? Like, yeah, he was cool. He was very strong. But as far as an antagonist, like, did him and Gon even ever meet? I didn't think so. Next. Alright, team. I don't know why Jesse and James are separate. They shouldn't be. Team Rocket, I count them as one. Irrelevant, honestly. What influence did they have outside of Giovanni in the games? Now, I don't know anything about the Pokemon manga, but I know about the anime. And I know that these two are nothing but comic relief. They lose the same way every time, and they say the same line every time they lose, because they were meant to be a fucking joke. Next, Nosferatu Zod. He is from Berserk. He is a pawn. A pawn of this. We gonna get to this nigga. But he is a pawn. He has no ambition of his own. He exists as basically just like a hammer. Irrelevant. Medusa. We can't really see her face, but this is Medusa. She was one of the antagonists from Soul Eater. Her goal was to revive this loser right here. Now, I put her a little higher than him because she was in the series longer. Again, I didn't read the manga. I'm going based off the anime. I don't know if she was more important in the anime, but I'm rather in the manga. But I know in the anime she was consistent. She was much more consistent than Kishin. But other than that, I mean, she's not someone you would remember. Rob Lucci. His picture was on this list, and that's why I used it. I don't know why he's here. The CP9 were important for the Straw Hats development. Like, I will say, if it wasn't for Lucci, there probably would not have been a Gear Second. And, you know, like, none of the Straw, like, Zolo and Sanji wouldn't have tried to improve themselves either if it weren't for getting smoked by Kaku and Lucci. But other than that, I don't understand why Lucci. I don't understand why his picture's here. Anyway, moving on. Like, they would have been better off putting like Eniru, you know. Anyway, Bradley, King Bradley. Oh, he's from Full Metal Alchemist. I don't know why he's here. Honestly, he was a bad guy, but he was another pawn. He had no plan of his own. He had no ambition. His ambition was just to grow old with his wife, like normal people do, I guess. He didn't even want anything. He was strong, you know. If this was strength tier list, he'd be much higher. But outside of his strength, he was irrelevant. He was just a fucking hammer, just like this nigga Nosferatu. He was another drone. Next, Esterosa. Esterosa is the definition of an identity crisis. He didn't even know who he was while he was, and honestly, Esterosa was just like, he was just there. You know, he was cool, don't get me wrong. His fight with Escanor was one of the better fights in the series. But after Escanor smoked his shit, and he came back, and then he tried to fight who did he try to fight? He tried to fight these guys, Elizabeth, King, Deanne, and Gautha, I think. And then we find out that Esterosa doesn't actually exist. He's someone else. And once you find that out, it's like Esterosa legit just ceases to exist. And the funny thing is, when he was like losing his mind and forgetting who he was, it was really funny because he really wanted to be Meliodas. He really, like, we thought he was like the younger brother who wanted to be like his big brother. And the funniest thing about this shit, just like a little, like, this is just like the last thing I'm gonna say about him. Funniest thing about Esterosa is that when you go back to the beginning of Sins, which is a terrible series, but when you go back to the beginning of Sins, his picture is the one they used for Meliodas' wanted poster. But I'm sure they forgot that. Anyway, next, Frieza, the Galactic Emperor. I mean, like, what can I say about Frieza? Frieza was fucking corny. Frieza wanted to become immortal. Just to become immortal. I guess so he could rule over the universe forever. Like, oh my gosh, Frieza was just fucking really corny villain. Like honestly, what did Frieza do? He showed up on Namek. He subjugated a bunch of niggas that were weaker than him. Kakarot popped out, and he underestimated him. Ended up getting his ass kicked because of it. Because in reality, Kakarot was not stronger than Frieza. He was not even on the same level as him. He was able to fight him, but that was because Frieza was not using his full power. You see, he didn't actually go 100% until Kakarot went Super Saiyan and beat his fucking face in. Then he used 100% of his power, and once he did, he started smoking Kakarot again. Like, it was kind of even. But Frieza had the upper hand for sure. Frieza definitely had the upper hand. And he ended up losing because of his own attack. Like, he didn't even lose. Like, he didn't even get defeated. He beat himself because he's a fucking moron. And other than that, what did he do besides lose? He came to Earth because somehow he was still alive, even though he clearly got evaporated when Kakarot blasted him. His father put him back together, gave him those nice little cybernetic implants. And then Trunks shows up out of nowhere and just one-shots him and his father. Just, you're dead. Come on, son. That was all he did. He came back in Super, but in Super, he wasn't even relevant. He wasn't even a villain anymore. That movie of his was not good. Revival of F, I didn't enjoy that movie. That movie was just a way to show off Super Saiyan Blue. And they just said, hey, we're going to just randomly come up with this transformation for Frieza because we want to bring him back, but we need a good reason to. Oh, I know. Let's pull a transformation out of our ass. Let's call it Golden Frieza, which is basically Super Saiyan. Because we just love this color so much. Anyway, moving on. Hendrickson. He was the main villain in the first season of Seven Deadly Sins. And I have no words for him. He was unremarkable. He was unmemorable. And he ended up becoming a good guy towards the end anyway. Because he was never really a bad guy. Apparently, he was just like influenced by darkness. He was just a pawn. I don't like, when it comes to pawns, they aren't usually impressive. He was like a case in point. Next. Yoshikage Kira. He was the main villain in part 4 of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Now I liked Kira. Like, I honestly did like Yoshikage. He was one of my he was one of the villains that I liked more. I definitely liked him more than Cause, but he was not at all important. Like, he wasn't important and he wasn't relevant either. Like, what did he do? He didn't want any. He literally, you know what he wanted? Yoshikage Kira only wants to live a quiet life. That was what he wanted. He wanted to live a quiet life. That was literally all he wanted. And he also had this really, really unhealthy habit, or rather this unhealthy hobby of killing people. And he did this for like, I think like 13 or like 15 years. He was getting away with killing people. He ended up getting a stand. He got, his stand, Killer Queen. He ended up getting a stand, and he just used his stand to help him kill people. So what? He touches you. If he touches you with if he touches you, he turns you to a bomb, and then he presses his fingers together. He can detonate the bomb. That's his stand ability. Later on, he got another ability where he could like blow away time, but his ability only, like, he could only use the bomb on non-stand users. It was a way to bring him closer to Dio in terms of power, but it didn't really work out. His final battle with Josuke was kind of cool. Josuke did like some okay things that he didn't do the entire series. But the one who ended up defeating him was Jotaro. It wasn't even Josuke. Jotaro was the one who got credit for defeating him. So, like, I don't even really know what he did. He didn't really do anything, honestly. That's why I don't know what he did, because he didn't do anything. Moving on. Crolo. He is the leader of the Phantom Troop in Hunter X Hunter, as it is written, but we call it Hunter. Like, I ain't even gonna hold you. I don't know why he's on this list. This nigga is a side character. He's not even an antagonist. He's a side character. I don't even think him and Gon ever actually met. Now that I'm sitting and thinking about it, I don't think him and Gon ever actually met. So, like the protagonist did shift in Hunter. Like right now, as far as I know, Kurapika is the main protagonist. But even him and Crolo haven't met, and Crolo is supposed to be the object of his revenge because he wants the revenge on the Phantom Troop. Crolo is the leader of the Phantom Troop, so you would think that he would want smoke with Crolo, but he only actually fought what was it, Ivo or Evo? I think his name was. And Crolo ended up, like, what is Crolo doing in the series right now? He's running away from Hisoka because Hisoka went around killing all his niggas because he tried to kill Hisoka. Like, Crolo is not an antagonist. I don't know why he's here, but he's here. He's not an antagonist, though. I don't consider him on the same level. Honestly, I should put this thing in. Yeah, hell yeah. He's in D tier, actually. I'm tripping. I put him in C tier. He's actually D tier. Hisoka. Hisoka might actually also be D tier. Like, this is another nigga who's here for nothing. He's not an antagonist. He had no real influence. Like, he did influence Gon for, like, a week. When he beat him in the test, he punched him in the face, and then he just left because he didn't need to pass the test because he wasn't interested in getting his hunter's license. He's just a battle maniac who literally gets off on fighting people, and he's a fucking sus boy because he's sexually attracted to Gon, who is a fucking 13-year-old boy, and this nigga Hisoka's a grown-ass man. Are you kidding me, bro? All he does is fight. That's all he wants to do is fight. That's it. He just wants to fight. He has nothing else going for him. He is fighting Crolo. Why am I talking about this nigga Hisoka right now? Listen, if you think Hisoka is higher than C tier, I'm tripping. He's D tier. He's not even C tier. This nigga is irrelevant. He's not even an antagonist. He is another side character, just like Crolo. He's just one of those niggas that's in the series because they want to tell a story. I don't even know why I had him in C tier. Him and Crolo are both D tier. Team Rocket is probably more relevant than those two. Illumi. Wait, I'm skipping. I'm sorry, because I got Illumi in B tier. I don't know why he's there. Actually, I do. I'll explain. Okay, yeah, I had to change I had to change those niggas' placements real quick. What the fuck am I thinking? Moving on. That's it for C tier and D tier. We're starting to get to the good parts. B tier. Mazgus. He was, if I'm not mistaken, he was an apostle, but he's definitely from Berserk. So Mazgus was actually a decent villain. He's one of those villains that exists just to show how strong the protagonist has gotten. So I wouldn't really call him an antagonist. He did have his own arc, which ended, well, actually, I guess at this point it ended a while ago because Berserk is still going, even though it's really inconsistent. Berserk is still going. But, he was cool. Like, he has some decent powers. But he was just a goon. Like, he wasn't like someone whom had their own ambition. You know, he was kind of just like working off of another man's plan, which is kind of what everybody in Berserk does. They honestly all just like work off of Griffith, because Griffith is the one who is really out here trying to make all these moves. And he is there the leader by default. And I'm spending way too much time talking about irrelevant characters. Anyway, moving on. That's Mazgus, B tier. Next, we got Pain. Actually, aka, or officially known as Yahiko. He was one of the main antagonists in Naruto. So here's the thing. For a very long time, it was it was widely believed that Yahiko was the main villain, right? It was widely believed that he was the main villain. And this is something that was propagated for maybe like 2 years. Turns out he was just a figurehead. So Yahiko, well, as you would know him, Pain. So he had a plan. Or at least he thought he had a plan. His plan was to capture all of the capture all of the tail beasts and use their power to end all fighting in the world by presenting the world with a superpower that could not be stopped. Now, this has to be one of the most ass-backwards plans you might know of, but that was his plan. His plan was basically to fight fire with fire, right? He says the world is at war, and the only way to stop war is to present a power that is greater than the powers that currently exist, so that war stops because this one superpower exists and no one can match it. That was this is his fucking logic. That was his plan. Now, it turns out that he was just a figurehead. He was actually completely and totally irrelevant. Like, it's funny, once you get to who the real villain is, you realize how unimportant this nigga was. Like, he was ridiculously unimportant. So this nigga Yahiko, he had no plan. Or rather, his plan was good, but his plan wasn't the plan. They allowed him to think that it was the plan. He wasn't even the leader of Akatsuki, right? Everybody thought he was, but he wasn't. He was just the one that everybody knows. Like, his face, like, this isn't even Pain. This is Yahiko. This is not Nagato. They don't even have Nagato's face here, right? This nigga is here just because his face is the one that everybody knows, but he is not the one who is in charge, okay? And honestly, he becomes irrelevant so quickly. Like, right after he loses to Naruto and they figure out that the Akatsuki is still operating even without him, and they realize the one who was really in charge was Obito, it's like, or rather Madara, it's like, whoa. So then, what was this nigga doing? And it's like he wasn't doing anything. They were allowing him to run around thinking he was in charge just so they can move around in the shadows. Because if everybody's focused on this nigga, nobody's going to see what's happening in terms of these niggas. So they allowed him to think that he was in charge, and they allowed everyone else to think that he was in charge. But in reality, he wasn't. He knew he wasn't in charge. He knew what was really going on. Him and Conan, they knew. Oh, they knew. But still, he was somewhat relevant for the time. You know, like when people did think that he was in charge of Akatsuki, he was making some pretty relevant moves. And I mean, he was snatching up a bunch of tail beasts and like shaking things up. So I'll give him that. He definitely did shake up the world. Next, we got Rokudo Mukuro. So he was the first antagonist in the Hitman Reborn series. Now, he's B tier because he really wasn't that important in the long run. Like, in the grand scheme of things, he wasn't important, but at the time, he was relevant. So what he did was he was responsible for awakening the main character, who was Tsunayoshi. He was responsible for awakening Suna. He presented him with the first real challenge that was in the series, because the series was like a giant joke. They were really just doing like a bunch of random day-to-day shit. It didn't become about fighting, and the series didn't like actually get to the point where it was telling its story until Mukuro popped out, and that was like 100 chapters in, which a lot of people don't even bother reading because those 100 chapters are really tough to read. Like, they suck. But after you get past those 100 chapters, the series gets pretty good. It really turns around. So Mukuro, he was an interesting guy. Basically, he wasn't really a villain, you know. So he was kidnapped by the mafia as a kid. He was experimented on. He was tortured, him and two of his other friends. They ended up escaping, and then of course their plan was to take down the mafia that had fucked up their childhood. That was really all he wanted to do. When you think about it, and when you hear those circumstances, I mean, isn't that understandable? To be tortured every single day, to be experimented on, to have your body constantly opened up and closed by people who don't give a fuck about you. If you had a chance to get revenge on them, wouldn't you take it? That was all he did. That was all he wanted, rather. But the means that he used to accomplish this were disagreeable with the protagonists, which is sometimes mostly the case. That's the case with a lot of these guys on this list. And like you'll see as we get there. But that's the case with some of the guys on these lists, right? Other than that, he was an asshole. Like, he was going around. He didn't kill anybody, but he was going around like kidnapping people. He was like negatively influencing people. He was trying to take over people's minds because he has the power of illusions. And he has this really weird ability where he can like astral project himself and he can possess other people and like leave his body behind. So when his body dies, he's still alive because his spirit is that strong. So it was a really weird ability. Like, the way they explain it at first is really murky, but when you see it in action, it basically is just him taking over other people. They make it seem like he's like reincarnating himself. Like, they make it seem like he's dying and come back to life, but that's not actually what's happening. But he was still pretty cool. But he's B tier because like he didn't have much of an influence on things that happened once he was gone. And he ended up becoming like a good guy at the end. You know, not like so much like a great guy, but he ended up joining up with the heroes. So that was enough. Like, that's enough to say that he became a good guy. Who's after Mukuro? Ukiura. So Ukiura was a villain, or rather he was one of the villains in Bleach. I wouldn't really call him an antagonist because he was one of many. He was legit part of a group where these niggas were all the same. They were all working for one person's ambition. He had no desires or plans of his own. He was just an automaton who did what he was told. I don't know why he's here, but I put him in B tier just because he did have a pretty strong influence on Ichigo moving forward, at least for the rest of that arc. Like, Ichigo really like, he took Ichigo's confidence away because he was way stronger than him. Ichigo could not beat him. Ichigo's full power was just enough to match him before release. And then once he released, like, the gap just went back to widening again. And then he had a second release that he just did to shit on Ichigo because he wanted to break Ichigo and he couldn't do it. Like, Ichigo continued to believe that he could win. He wouldn't drop his sword. He wanted to break him. He wanted him to feel despair because that's what he represents. So that didn't happen. So he ended up releasing again just to shit on him. But ultimately, because he released again, he awakened something in Ichigo that was always there but was on and off. Ended up getting smoked. And then he died. And then that was it. You never see nor hear from him again. So I don't know why he's here, but we'll put him B tier just because he did have more of an influence on the protagonist than any of these niggas that are under him. And then Illumi. So Illumi's here. All right, Illumi was a character from Hunter x Hunter. He was kind of an antagonist, but he wasn't really that important. Like, Illumi was around for a little bit. I think he was in for like maybe a total of like 10 scenes. You know, like, he was in the first season, but he was in disguise. And once he dropped his disguise, like, that was it. Like, the most important thing about Illumi was that he had that needle in Killua's head, and like, once Killua ripped the needle out, he wasn't like following him anymore. He wasn't obeying him anymore. He was able to become his own man. Outside of that, Illumi's really irrelevant. Like, he pops in every now and then, but he's B tier just because for a time, Killua was the main character. He was the protagonist for a time when Gon had given up his fucking powers for one fight. I'm never gonna talk about Gon, but Gon had given up his powers for one fight just to prove a point, and ended up disproving that point because he's a fucking moron. Anyway, Illumi is kind of B tier, but you could argue he's C tier, but just because I like Killua, I'll put Illumi B tier. And him and Gon did have some form of an interaction, but whatever. You know what? Actually, Illumi's actually C tier. I'm tripping. He's not B tier because him and Ukiura are similar, but Ukiura had much more of an influence on Ichigo than Illumi had on Gon or on Killua. And he only had influence on Killua because he was his older brother. I mean, like, you would expect that. Now we get to A tier. A tier is definitely the biggest tier because a lot of these guys here, they were very relevant for their arcs. Like, they were very relevant, you know, and they definitely influenced things in a way that was more prominent than these niggas down here. And if I'm not mistaken, yeah, none of the guys up here are pawns except for the one. Yeah, there's only one actual pawn up here. So let's begin. We got Juha. So I don't know how to pronounce his I never knew how to pronounce his name. His full name. We call him Juha. We call him Juha for short. So Juha is definitely bottom A tier. Like, A tier is not really in order. It kind of is. No, not really. A tier is not really in order. But if A tier was in order, Juha would be bottom A tier. So Juha is what I would like to call an ass pull, or rather what we call an ass pull. An ass pull's another word for a retcon. A retcon, if you don't know, is when something has already existed, and then, or rather when continuity has already been set, and then you add things to past continuity to justify current continuity, right? If I didn't explain that well enough, an example would be, say, what am I thinking of? Damn, what am I thinking of? That was like a heavy ass retcon. That was like popular. I don't know about too many popular retcons. But for an example, a retcon would be, let's say, Spider-Man. Spider-Man existed for however many years, and let's say for the entire time, his history was cemented that he got bit by a spider at random. A retcon would be another artist or author, or the original author saying, no, that's not actually what happened. What actually happened was the spider was directed to bite him by, I don't know, Norman Osborn, and that's how he got his powers. It wasn't random. That would be a retcon. When you push something for years and then you suddenly change it because you want to tell a new story. That's a retcon. That's what Juha is. Juha is probably Bleach's biggest retcon. So we always knew the Quincy existed, right? They have quite literally always existed. Everybody knew that. Now, Juha apparently has existed this entire time, but he wasn't spoken of until the very end. He's supposed to be the god of Quincy. His abilities do not make sense. Okay, now if you read them, they might make sense, but there's a good chance they might make you dizzy. His ability is simply to say no to your ability. And he basically he can warp reality, right? So reality warping, between like me and Troy would have to consider reality warping to be probably the most busted ability you can have, and I personally say reality warping is the strongest ability. Reality warping being the ability to create something out of nothing is essentially God. You need nothing to create something. That's God. That's reality warping. That's what Juha does. He has low-level reality warping. Now, in Western comics, like Marvel and DC, reality warping is much more common. It's much more common. Like, it's something that is understandable because they explain it through science. Now, anime, they don't typically rely on science. They kind of just say, this is how things are based off the lore that we created, and this is how things are going to be. That's Juha. So, his reality warping is very low level, meaning that he can't create things out of nothing, but he can bend the laws of reality, which is really stupid. You have to see it in action, because I'm not explaining it that great because it's not that great. Because like when you actually try to explain this shit, you realize just how stupid it is. But his ability is really dumb. If you want more on it, I'd say look him up yourself. But his ability is really dumb. So the only reason why Juha is A tier is because he legitimately influenced an entire generation of Quincy, right? He basically started the Stern Ritter. He succeeded in taking out Soul Society. Like, he popped out, he demolished shit, and then he left of his own accord. No one made him leave. He left because he wanted to, right? And he came back and he attacked those niggas again. Now, not many villains can lead like their niggas into your stronghold and pull it off successfully. Not many people have done that. Nobody on this list down here has done that. Like Pain, he infiltrated Konoha solo. Yeah, he had 6 bodies, but all those bodies worked as one, right? Frieza, nobody on Namek was strong enough to stop him. So I don't even understand why that's relevant. Yeah. That would be it. Like, they pulled up on Meruem. He didn't pull up on them. And Crolo, he pulled up on a bunch of niggas. He pulled up on civilians. Him and the Phantom Troop, they pulled up on civilians. There's a couple of fucking security guards that could not possibly hope to match them, right? So he took his army, marched into the enemy base, and he won. He didn't lose. He won. And he defeated the enemy commander. Like, if it was a video game, he would have advanced to the next fucking stage because he cleared that one. He came back and shat on these niggas again just because they wanted to tell a story. Just because they wanted to tell a story. His goal was the same as everyone's. He wanted to rule. His goal was not unique, but because of the influence and the impact that he had on Soul Society, because he reminded them as to how weak they were. And these niggas, they did so much fucking bullshit to try and find a way for him to lose that it was mind-numbing. Like, that's how terribly written he was, but at the same time, that's how busted he was. They had to keep coming up with a whole bunch of different ways for him to lose, and none of them worked. And he ended up losing to his own ability. Like, honestly, he ended up losing to another reality warping type of ability. One that wasn't as powerful as his, but they used it at a time where it was more effective than his was. Basically, that's how they took him down. But he's A tier just because he was able to march in and win. He started a war and he won it. And he started another war and he lost that one, but he wasn't supposed to lose, honestly. But other than that, I don't know. I put him bottom A tier if it was order. He's arguably B tier, probably. The only reason why he's not, he's a higher than Ukiura because he was the leader. But whatever. Next, Goku Black. Now, if he wasn't such a hoe, he might actually be S tier. He might actually be. So, Goku Black, he was one of the antagonists in Dragon Ball Super, which is a spin-off of Dragon Ball, or rather a sequel to Dragon Ball Z. Now, if you don't know about Goku Black, I'm gonna tell you about him real quick. Now, he might look like Kakarot, right? It is Kakarot. So Goku Black is basically Kakarot's body with the soul of one of the Supreme Kai named Zamasu. Now, Zamasu met Kakarot by chance. They fought. He lost. And then ever since then, he became obsessed with the nigga. That's literally what it was. So in his obsession, he decided, I'm so obsessed with this nigga, and I probably won't ever be able to defeat him. So how about I just become him? Now, he was jealous of him because of his strength. He felt like someone who wasn't a god should not be that strong. He that was why he was mad. He was upset because this man trained his whole life and fought in many life or death battles to reach that level of strength. And all he did was train up with this old ass man with yellow skin and white hair and drink fucking tea and watch videos all day. And his destiny was to do just that. So he got jealous of this nigga who had to work his ass off to get what he got, because I guess it was just a gift. He goes, oh, the gods shouldn't allow you to be that strong. The gods blessed you with this strength. The gods didn't bless him with shit, okay? If they blessed him with anything, they blessed him with the most important thing that you need, and that's ambition, determination, tenacity. That's what he was blessed with, if he was blessed with something, not strength. But he didn't see things that way. So anyway, he decided to become him. So he pulled off a full-on body snatch. Except he did it differently from Ginyu, because he didn't use the technique. He used the Dragon Balls. He used the Dragon Balls to switch bodies with Kakarot, and he became Kakarot. And then he just lived on as Kakarot. And his goal was to just eliminate all humans. The Zero Mortal plan. His goal was literally to kill all humans and just live life without humans. That was his goal. And he pulled it off. He actually pulled it off. He needed help, but he did it. His philosophy was very, very, very plain. Like, he thought that he was justified in doing the things that he was doing because he was a god. So he figured that everything that he did was okay. And mortals were evil because they take the gifts of the gods and they waste them. Ultimately, he's a fucking loser because all he wanted was to be someone else. He couldn't get it done as himself, so he became someone else. Like, you won't see anyone saltier than this man. You would be hard pressed to find a saltier fucking character than him. You would be hard pressed to find a saltier character than Zamasu. Super hard pressed. But ultimately, he did manage to accomplish his goal. He did eliminate all humans. He even became the universe. So you know what? Actually, he's S tier. I'm tripping. Like, you see him as Kakarot, but imagine him as Zamasu. Like, imagine Zamasu here. Imagine merge Zamasu, his final form. Because he accomplished his goal. He eliminated all humans. And no one could do anything about it. I mean, ultimately he defeated, but it was after he accomplished his goal. And in case you don't know, if your goal was accomplished, you're automatically S tier. automatically. If your plan succeeded, you're automatically S tier. That's just how I'm doing things. That's just how I'm coming with it. So yeah, Black is S tier. I'm tripping. Next, we got Toguro. So Toguro was the first antagonist in Yu Yu Hakusho. I'm not too sure about Toguro. Like, Troy would probably have more of an opinion, because when it comes to Yu Yu Hakusho, Troy is a lot more knowledgeable on it. So when he sees this, he's probably gonna think Toguro. He might agree with the Toguro placement. I don't know, but I know he's probably gonna think Sensui should be higher. But Toguro, like, he was okay. You know, he really isn't memorable. Like, honestly, I think Sensui is a better villain than him. But Toguro is the villain you see most often when it comes to the villain representation for Yu Yu Hakusho. Like, in all the games Toguro's in, you don't see Sensui in any games. Well, the crossover games anyway. Like J-Stars and Jump Force, they chose Toguro instead of Sensui. And Yomi's not here at all, because I guess they don't consider Yomi a villain. But I can't really say much about Toguro. I got him A tier, but I don't know why. Yeah, he's B tier. Next, we got Father. He was the main antagonist from Full Metal Alchemist. So he's A tier. I have him here because his influence was actually felt across the world. So he had a pretty decent plan, or rather, the means to accomplish his plans were pretty decent. So his plan was his goal was the same as most. He wanted to become a god. He wanted to become a supreme god that would just rule over the world. Now, in order to do this, in order for this plan to be accomplished, he needed certain conditions to be met. And those conditions, I think one of them was like an eclipse or some shit like that. And it was something that would take time. So this plan of his was like centuries in the making, actually. Like, this plan of his actually was centuries in the making. And he drew a gigantic alchemy circle that encompassed the whole world, if I'm not mistaken. And then, of course, he had the homunculus doing his bidding. And Bradley being one of the homunculi. And Envy. I really don't know why Bradley. Like, Bradley, yeah, but I still don't know why Envy is here. But anyway, he had the homunculi doing his bidding, right? And he accomplished half of his goal. He did manage to get a body for himself, because he didn't have like his own body. He had his body was like his body was also a homunculus body. It was an artificial body. But he ended up getting his own body, which was half of his goal. But it stopped there, because he didn't actually manage to take over the world, because he lost to Ed, of course. And that was pretty much it. But his influence, his plan and his influence was still felt, because he was like a shadowy figure in the series. Everybody knew he existed because they knew he was the mastermind behind the homunculus, and the homunculus were going around just wrecking shop. Every time niggas saw them, they were wilding. So when they saw that, and they saw that he was the leader, it gave him more relevance, because in order to organize something like that and to put something like that together, it takes a certain amount of ambition. And although he created all of them, he still did most of the work. So I don't know. He might actually be lower than B tier. But just because his plan was decent, he accomplished half of it. And he was pretty strong. Like, they had to give up everything to beat him. You know? Like, they had to use everything. It wasn't something that they could just do. But he didn't really have too much of an influence on Ed. He had a major influence on Hohenheim. Or rather, Hohenheim had a major influence on him. I guess you could say it was vice versa. But he didn't really have much of an influence on Ed. But Ed, like, him and Ed were the ones who were the final battle. Like, it was him and Ed who ended up fighting at the end. So even though he wasn't super relevant, he still was adequate opposition. So we could put him A tier. Next, we got Sensui. Sensui was one of the antagonists from Yu Yu Hakusho. So if I'm not mistaken, Sensui's plan was that he wanted to merge the demon world with the human world, I think. It was something like that. But if I remember correctly, Sensui himself isn't a demon. He's actually a human. He was the first spirit detective before Yusuke. I know that for certain. And he's basically Yusuke times like maybe 20, maybe even 100. So him and Yusuke fought a couple of times, I think. I think they fought twice. I know he beat Yusuke, and then Ryzen possessed Yusuke, and that was Ryzen was the one who ended up beating Sensui. But Yusuke lost to Sensui. Sensui was his superior. And Sensui was actually like, he was a cool guy because he used to be a good guy. Like, he used to be a hero. Sorry, I drink some water. But he was a good guy. He wasn't originally a villain, you know? So his reasoning, it wasn't that bad. It's like he saw the way things were and he didn't agree with them. So he was just like, I'm going to change things myself because I see what lies at the end of this path. Right? But other than that, I don't know too much about Sensui, so I can't go too in-depth about him. Like I said, I would defer to Troy on that one. So when Troy sees this, I wonder what he'll think of the Sensui placement. Next, we got All For One. His story's not really finished. I got him in A tier because he does have a pretty large influence over the series. He's the one that set a lot of things that are happening into motion. So I got him in A tier for that. But his story's not finished, as I said, and I think that I think there's still a lot more that he's gonna do. So I put him in A tier for now because what he has done so far does make him A tier. He's definitely higher than B tier. Because he's directly influenced All Might, and All Might has directly influenced Izuku, so by extension, he has influenced Izuku. So I'll put him there. Next we got Chisaki, also known as Overhaul. He was one of the antagonists in My Hero Academia, as it is properly said, but we call it Boku for short. So Chisaki was cool. He was like important for his arc, but outside of his arc, he wasn't really that important. The bullets that he developed will end up being very important. So his goal was pretty simple, actually. He really just wanted to bring the Yakuza back to prominence because he felt like the world had forgotten about them. And granted, they did, because, you know, you had the League of Villains, and then you had a bunch of other guys doing their own thing. And ultimately, the Yakuza were just like a model of the old world, you know? And because of that, nobody cared about them anymore. Like, you got to think about it. Boku is happening, like, based off real time. So people only recently got powers in that series. Like, they didn't always have powers. It was a mutation that had developed over time. So the Yakuza still existed, and once everybody got powers, like, who the fuck is worried about the Yakuza anymore when you got niggas flying around shooting fire out of their mouths, you know? But other than that, he was still cool. He did, like, push Deku past his limit, but that was mostly because of Lemillion. He did have more of an influence on Lemillion than he did Deku, but I'll put him A tier just because he had a pretty decent plan. He was very skilled. He was very well written, and he was one of those characters that further tried to open the eyes of the heroes, you know, because he didn't agree with the Hero Society. He wasn't as important as Stain, but he also didn't agree with the way heroes did things, because he also saw the corruption that is like hidden underneath the Hero Society. You know, so he didn't really want to change it. He kind of just took advantage of it, you know. But other than that, he was more so just like a really ambitious guy, you know, like super ambitious. He ended up getting violated, though. He's not dead, but he ended up getting violated. He might as well be dead. Next, we got Zeref, who is the main antagonist in Fairy Tail. Now, Zeref is in A tier because he probably has the biggest influence on a series, or rather within a series, that any antagonist could have. He's definitely, actually, there's two more niggas on this list who have an influence as large as his. He had a ridiculously prominent influence. Almost every single villain and antagonist in Fairy Tail was inspired by Zeref. Almost all of them. Almost all of them are either doing his bidding or they're trying to resurrect him, even though he's not dead. Everyone, I mean everyone, is tied to Zeref in some way, shape, or form. Who was the first antagonist in Fairy Tail? The first major antagonist was Jalal, right? Jalal, possessed by Zeref, or at least he thought he was. He was obsessed with resurrecting him. Fucking who are these guys? Zero, possessed by Zeref, obsessed with reviving him. If I'm not mistaken, I might be. I haven't read Fairy Tail because I haven't read Fairy Tail in years, but What I do remember of Fairy Tail is mostly towards the end. I remember how Zaref was extremely and incredibly overrated. That's not his fault. That's just a result of bad writing, so I'm not going to lower him in the tier list because of that. But he was written terribly. I mean, when he actually came into the series, they hyped him up for so long. I mean, for so long. They hyped him up in a major way. Honestly, you won't see many other characters get hyped up the way he got hyped up. And then he didn't deliver at all. He delivered on nothing. He was a horribly written villain. He was all hype. He's all bark, no bite. Basically, he was all bark, no bite. He was a horrible villain that was in a series that was pretty decent, but then got really shitty towards the end. Like, writing just deteriorated, and Zaref was a big part of that. Like, they talked him up like he was the ultimate villain, and he lost to a nigga that uses fire. Mind you want to know what Zaref's magic is? He controls life and death. And he lost to a nigga that uses fire. And how did that nigga that uses fire beat him? By punching him. Yeah. That was how he lost. To a punch. Moving on. Akainu. I wouldn't really call Akainu an antagonist, but he would be considered an antagonist. He's one of the antagonists from One Piece. Now, the funny thing about Akainu is that he's not a bad guy. I said this before. I say this often. He's not a bad guy. The Marines aren't bad guys. Like, honestly, they're upholding the law. In reality, the pirates would be the criminals. They're the ones going around cheating, stealing. Like, being pirates. Pirating is illegal. He's just a Marine. He's just doing his job. Granted, he did kill Ace. But, I mean, again, he was just doing his duty. He's a Marine. I got a Akainu A tier, but I'm not sure why, actually. B tier. Next, we got Shigaraki Tomura. He is probably going to end up being the main antagonist in Boku. But he's currently the main antagonist. So, although Tomura is a disciple of All For One, he's not his pawn. He wants him to be his pawn, but he's not his pawn. He actually has his own goals and ambitions. All he wants to do is destroy everything. Mainly, he wants to destroy the hero society because he thinks it's fake. You know, he thinks heroes only save who they want. He thinks heroes decide who's good and who's bad, and he doesn't agree with that. And he decides he wants to take the power of the decision making into his own hands. And he does just that. Honestly, that's really it. As far as his character is still being developed right now. His character development, in my opinion, is incredible. But his character is still underway. So he hasn't reached his apex, and he's still growing. But currently, I would put him A tier, just because, you know, he started the League of Villains. He's the one who's in charge of them. He's the one who is making all these brazen moves, like attacking UA about 3 or 4 times. Every time they take the kids from the school, he attacks them. They kidnap Bakugo. They try to flip them to their purposes. And he was the one who ended up taking over Overhaul's plan of creating a society where they had the drug that could remove your quirk, but then they also had the drug that can give you back your quirk. So his plan was to basically hit niggas with the double whammy. You know, you hit them with the supply and demand. You take away everyone's powers, and then you present them with the cure. And then all those people whose powers you've taken away will unbiasedly purchase that cure from you. They'll probably do it with a smile on their face. That's really, you know, that's hustling, like, or rather, that's cornering the market. You know, creating the market and then cornering it. You create the market by spreading the disease that needs to be cured, and then you corner the market by being the only person who has the cure. And then you start mass producing that cure, selling it to everybody, but you have the majority share. So that was his plan, and Tomura ended up taking all of that from him within like 3 or 4 panels. It was hilarious, actually. But Tomura is still on his way up because he's the leader, because he has a growing influence, because he is definitely influencing his world majorly right now. I think he'll potentially be S tier, but right now he's like A tier. Next, we got Don Quixote do Flamingo. He was an antagonist in One Piece. He was I think he was like 2 or 3 arcs ago. Dressrosa was what, 3 arcs ago? Dressrosa should have been 3 arcs ago. Now, here's the thing about Dopey. He's another character who's not really a villain. He's not like, he's an antagonist. He's not a good guy, but he's not necessarily a bad guy either. Now, Dopey is one of the more likable characters in One Piece. He's definitely one of my favorites. Here's the thing about Dopey. If you were in his situation, you would probably make the same decisions as him. Think about it. So he was a kid, right? His family was pretty well off, but then something happened. I forget what it was. Something happened, and his family ended up losing like everything. They lost their name, they lost their fortune, and they were put up for execution. But he ended up surviving somehow. Oh, right, because he had Conqueror's Haki. So as he was growing up, he had no money, he had no food, he was living on the streets, and then suddenly he runs into this group that meet him, and they recognize that he has Conqueror's Haki, and they tell him, yo, you're meant to be great things, you're meant to be a king in this world, like your color of your Haki is unique, feel me? That color is, well, not unique, the color of your Haki is extremely rare. You have the Conqueror's Haki, that's not something that everyone has. So he ends up clicking up with these individuals who were pirates, you know, Trebo, Diamante, Senor Pink, and no, not Senor Pink, Trebo, Diamante, and Pika. So he ends up clicking up with these guys who become his family, and he becomes a pirate. Now, him coming from nothing, he learns that there's an island out there called Dressrosa, just ripe for the picking. So what does he do? He takes it over, hostile. He does it because he can. Right? He does it because he knows what it's like to have nothing. So he refuses to go back to having nothing. And in order to avoid that, he needs to have everything. You know, the funny thing about Dopey is that he was still having nightmares of his past. Like, he was still having nightmares of his childhood. You know? The way his father pretty much sold him and his brother out. His brother went off and did his own thing. And he ended up just maintaining his crew as his family. And he protected them, and he did everything for them. And they did the same thing for him, you know? But, like, think about that. If you come from nothing, if you're just starving, I mean starving, and someone offers you an opportunity to eat, you're probably going to take it. That's all he did, you know? Here's the thing. Like, Dopey has one of the more memorable quotes from One Piece. I actually have it hanging up on my wall. And it's kids who have never seen peace and kids who have never seen war have different values. Right? Those who stand at the top determine what's wrong and what's right. Simple as that. And that is what it is. Like, Dopey had a lot of, like, the way he was thinking about things, it wasn't wrong. The way he was going about things was disagreeable, but his thought process wasn't wrong. He did what anyone in his situation would have done. He was already at the bottom, so he said, fuck that. I'm going to get to the top the only way that I can, and once I do, I'm going to stay there by any means, because I refuse to be hungry again. Feel me? Like, it comes down to being as simple as that. He refused to be hungry again. Anyone would have gone that path. I know I would have. Hell yeah, I would have took over Dressrosa if they gave me the opportunity. And I wouldn't have hesitated. Why should I have to be hungry when you get to eat? So yeah, Dopey's A tier. If it wasn't for Dopey, then Traff wouldn't have grown as much as he did. Right? Although Dopey didn't have a major influence on Luffy, him and Luffy did have a pretty massive fight. They had a pretty massive fight. And, like, I fuck with Dopey. I fuck with Dopey to the max. You know? So I put him A tier. Next, we got Byakuran. So Byakuran was, as far as the anime is concerned, he was the main antagonist in Hitman Reborn. As far as the manga is concerned, he was just an antagonist. He wasn't the final. If you read the manga, then you know. But if you read the series, then you should probably read the manga. So, Byakuran was an interesting villain. Now, his plan was pretty basic, but the way he went about it was definitely different. So his plan was simple. He wanted to take over the world. That wasn't always his plan, but that's what it became. His goal was to take over the world, right? The way he did this was unique. So he had this ability, this very, very, I don't think I've seen this ability before, and I definitely hadn't seen the ability before, and I haven't seen it since him. He has this really cheap ability. he can share his consciousness, or rather, he can share his thoughts. No, not consciousness, right? He can share his thoughts and his consciousness with himself across dimensions. Right? Let me tell you what that means. So in Hitman Reborn, they have the parallel world theory pretty much the same as they have in Dragon Ball. So they have this item. It's called the 10-year bazooka. When you get hit with this bazooka, you switch places with yourself 10 years in the future. This item is like, it's a gag item at first. It doesn't become relevant until the series gets real. And the series don't get real until the second arc, which is basically Byakuran's arc. So until then, it's just a gag item. It's used by this character. His name's Lambo. It's not an important item. Once it becomes an important item and they explain to you how it works, you see that it's actually pretty fucking cheap. So what happens is, right, so like I said, you switch places with you switch places with yourself 10 years in the future when you get hit by the item, right? Now they only focus on the you that got switched, right? So they focus on the future you when the times in the series where they showed it off. It wasn't until the second arc where they begged the question, what happens to the you that gets replaced, right? What happens to the you that got switched out? So there's a character in the show they introduced. His name is Soichi. So he manages to get his hands on the 10-year bazooka, and he accidentally shoots himself with it, or one of the shells went off, and it sends him 10 years in the future. So he switches places with his 10-year self, and instead of focusing on the 10-year version, or rather, instead of focusing on the future version, they focus on the current version. So he goes to the future, and he sees that the path that he was on is basically the path that he stood on. He sees that he becomes like this academic kid. He stood in school or whatever, and that's how his life ended up. But that's not what he wanted. So apparently he wanted to be a musician. Now the interesting thing here is that when he went to the future, he met Byakuran, right? He just randomly met him. He was one of the kids that was going to his school. They didn't know each other before then. He randomly met him. They said hello. They hung out, I think, and then that was it. Like the bazooka only lasts for 10 minutes. So within that 10 minutes, he got to know Byakuran. I guess that's how they describe it. But the point is that he remembered meeting him. So he goes back to the present, which is his current self, and he's just like, oh, well, I don't want to become, I want to be a musician. I don't want to follow academics, right? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to change my future. So he throws away all of his books, all of his study material, whatever, and he writes down this note to himself that says, become a musician no matter what, basically. Then he hits himself with the 10-year bazooka again. So when he goes to the future this time, the version of himself that he replaces actually did become a musician. He was a fucking trash musician, but he became a musician. The thing that is interesting is that when he went to this future, he met Byakuran again. Now, that might not seem that relevant, but it's actually the most relevant thing. Because when he met Byakuran, he remembered him, but of course, you know, like, of course he remembered Byakuran, but Byakuran didn't remember him, of course. The anomaly occurs when Byakuran starts to remember this nigga. Now, this should not be possible because he did not meet this version. Now, here's the thing about parallel worlds. If you don't understand how parallel worlds, it's pretty simple. You have, let's say you got you. This version of yourself, let's say, is Danger Prime, right? Now, Danger Prime is the you that exists primarily. This is the first version of you that exists in, I guess, more or less the real world, Earth Prime. Now, in the future, you're going to become something. Doesn't, like, whatever it is. Let's say you on the path to becoming a bodybuilder. So, in the future, you become a professional bodybuilder, da-da-da. Now, let's say, suddenly, you don't want to be a bodybuilder, right? Let's say, instead of being a bodybuilder, you want to be, like, a basketball player, right? Now, the version of you that becomes a bodybuilder still exists, okay? But now there's another version of you that didn't become a bodybuilder and became a basketball player instead. These two versions of you exist simultaneously, not in the same place, but in different places. Now, you created that second world when you decided to change paths, because the path that you were on, that timeline still exists, right? All you did was alter it. Now, there's a parallel world. So there's a world where you became a bodybuilder, and there's a world where you became a professional basketball player, whatever. Now, let's say you don't want to be a basketball player. You want to be a musician. So you become a musician. Now, there's 3 versions of you, right? Now, there are 3 worlds that exist simultaneously, side by side. But although these worlds exist simultaneously, you can't interact with them because of the dimensional barrier. You can't do it. It's just not possible. But it still exists. You just have to believe in that possibility. The only thing that is constant is Danger Prime, the original version of you, because that original version of you is what ties together all these parallels, because the original you is what created the parallels, right? So when you have that, or rather, that's the parallel world theory, basically, in a nutshell. I think I explained it well enough. Now imagine all of these parallel versions of you exist, right? Imagine there's a version of you that, like, I don't know, fuck around and became president of the United States. Imagine there's a version of you that fuck around and became the most wanted man in America. Now imagine you can interact with those people. Like, imagine you can interact with yourself. That's Byakuran's ability. He has the ability to simultaneously share his knowledge and experience with every version of himself across the multiverse. That is a ridiculously cheap ability. Why is it cheap? Think about it. Just think about it and you will understand why that shit is cheap. Like I said, imagine there's a version of you that becomes president and there's a version of you that becomes the ultimate criminal. Now, y'all live in 2 different worlds. These worlds may be similar, but there will definitely be things that are different. Now, the version of you that became president clearly knows something that the version of you became the most wanted man in America, in the world, doesn't know, and vice versa. But if you could share that information in between the two, imagine what you could become. The version of you that becomes president probably will always be president, because you know exactly what it's going to take for you to lose that, because there's a version of you that did lose it, and you were made privy to that information. So now the prime version of you gets all of this information constantly. Basically, you run in a bunch of simulations that you don't actually have to invest in. And once you find the simulation that works, you can just go all in on that one with no risk and all reward. That was this nigga's ability, and that is exactly what he did. That's how he took over the world. He took over every single version of reality because he constantly shared information with every version of himself. Every version of himself was able to have a leg up on people because he had information that didn't exist. It's like, oh, in this world, we developed a serum that literally cures all diseases. So now I know how to make this serum in this world. So I'm going to send that information to the version of me that lives in a super disease-ridden world. That version of me will automatically be capable of creating this serum, because at the very least, the materials exist throughout. And then boom, you become the most important person in that world, because you, who probably not even a fucking scientist, just created the ultimate fucking antidote, and nobody's questioning it because they're too busy praising your fucking discovery. It won't be until, like, once they start questioning how you figure it out, by then it's already too late. They probably already handed you the fucking keys. That was his ability. Now, the reason why he lost was because there was literally only one fucking version of reality where he could lose. Because there was one version of reality that possessed a certain set of items that had the power to sever his connection to his other selves. And not only that, but it could seal him and completely remove his ability. Like, he would still exist, but there would only be one version of him that existed. They would remove every other version of him from the multiverse, basically restoring the shit. That was how he lost, because he decided to set up shop in the one fucking world that he could lose in. That was how he lost. But the fact that his goal was he accomplished his goal 99 times before he lost the once. That's godlike. That is godlike as fuck. Like, his ambition was realized. He ended up taking over the world 99 times, but it was that 100th time that bit him in the ass. But still, he tasted victory 99 times. Granted, that one time removed the taste from his mouth completely, but hey, who else you know actually accomplished their goal 99 fucking times? Nobody that I can see. Nobody on this list. That's why he's A tier. Not good enough to be S tier, but he's A tier. Next, we got How. He was the main villain, or rather, he was the main antagonist in Shaman King. I put him A tier because he was like the only. He was really the only one that mattered in Shaman King. As far as antagonists go, he was legit the only one that mattered. His influence was such that he had so many followers because of his strength. But other than the fact that he was ridiculously strong, that was pretty much it. Like, his goal was the same as everyone's. He wanted to become a god and rule over everyone else. And Yo, who was the main character, wasn't with that, of course. Nobody was. But the reason why he was so relevant was legitimately because they had to reach an absurd level of power just to beat him. He was that much further ahead of everyone else because he was alive for like 1,000 years or some crazy shit like that. And his plan was almost, like, he almost completed his plan. He was damn close. Like, he lost at the very end. He lost based off like some protagonist bullshit. But his plan was pretty solid. Like, to become a god, he made it pretty far. They had a tournament just to beat this nigga. Like, awesome. Like, they created a tournament just to fight him because there was no other way to create an opportunity to fight him. Then they had to build up their power over the course of the entire series just to stop this nigga. Feel me? And even then, they just barely got by. He was super legit. In my opinion, of course. And then lastly, we got Cell. So everybody, like, you should know Cell the way you know Frieza. He was one of the antagonists in Dragon Ball Z. Now, I watched Dragon Ball Z growing up. Dragon Ball Z, Pokemon, and Digimon. Those were the first 3 anime that I consumed in this life. They were the first 3 series that I'd even recognize as anime, right? As I'm sure most kids in the 90s did, especially growing up in the inner city. Now, Cell is probably the villain that I remember the best because I like Frieza. The Frieza arc was already done by the time I was like watching TV because I was born in '93. The Frieza arc was already done, and like the Cell arc was like the arc that was being rerun on Tsunami because, you know, Tsunami, they would just rerun Dragon Ball over and over from start to finish, or Dragon Ball Z rather. And Cell was the villain that I knew the best because he was the one that was most prominent. So I thought Cell was a bit different from other Dragon Ball villains because he didn't really want to take over the world. He didn't really want to destroy the planet. He just wanted to prove how good he was. Like, he just wanted to be perfect. And he just wanted to prove his superiority and then just, you know, be chilling. Really. That was really all he wanted. Now, if it wasn't for Cell, Gohan would not have reached the level that he did. And Gohan was supposed to be the protagonist because Cell managed to beat Kakarot. Although Kakarot gave up that fight, Cell probably would have won if they would have kept fighting. Then he ends up fighting Gohan, and for some reason, after he kills 16, after 16 gives his legendary speech to Gohan, just let it go. After he takes him out, Gohan goes Super Saiyan 2 and just straight smokes this nigga Cell. But for some strange reason, in the middle of the fight, he starts to get arrogant. He starts to get cocky. His Saiyan nature just starts showing up crazy. I don't really know why. I think they just wanted to, like, they didn't want Gohan to win. You know, they felt like, the way I saw that shit, it was like they were trying to force the issue. Because it was like they already decided that Kakarot wasn't going to beat Cell, but then they started to double back on it. Right? They tried to go back on that, and it was just like, oh, wait, but Kakarot needs to be involved somehow. He needs to influence the outcome of this fight somehow. I think that is what that was. But honestly, if you think about it, Cell is probably the one who humbled Vegeta. Like, after he went perfect and Vegeta hit him with that final flash and it did nothing. Notice that was really when Vegeta started to, like, change. Like, that was when he started to get a little softer. He started to be more of a family man. That was when he became who he is in Super, which is an extremely well-developed character. He's nowhere near the villain that he used to be. Feel me? I give Cell that credit. So I put Cell in A tier for that. Now finally we have S tier. We at the end of the video. We already talked about Black. Put him above Orochimaru. Now we got Orochimaru. Orochimaru is bottom S tier. Now I put Orochimaru S tier because honestly, Naruto Shippuden would not exist without Orochimaru. That's just, like, I feel that's a fact. That's not even my opinion. Now, the whole purpose of Shippuden was to retrieve Sasuke. That was literally the whole point. You might want to dress it up, and you might want to try and think that it was for something different. But literally, the entire plot of Shippuden is Naruto trying to, quote-unquote, save Sasuke. That was why it started. That was how it ended. It was the entire point, my nigga. The entire point. So, who was the reason why Sasuke needed to be saved? Orochimaru. Orochimaru was the one who put the idea in Sasuke's head that he could get way stronger than he was. Granted, Sasuke was his second choice because he wanted Itachi, but he couldn't get him. Itachi was way ahead of him. So he said, fuck it, I'm gonna go for the younger brother. Now he takes Sasuke and he shows him a level of power that he hadn't seen. And then of course he tells him, listen, I can give you this power. Like, I can show you how to get this strong so that you could achieve your revenge, because Orochimaru knew what Sasuke wanted. So he was able to play on that, right? So if Orochimaru never does that, if Orochimaru doesn't exist, Sasuke never leaves the village, right? Granted, he always wanted his revenge, but he was falling into this sense of peace and security in the village with Naruto and Sakura and Kakashi. Like, he was okay with just living a civilian life to the point where he wasn't even going after Kakashi. I mean, he wasn't even going after his brother anymore. This is what would have happened without Orochimaru. Now, Orochimaru showing up planted the seed that is desire. And that shit answers pretty much everything. He created Sasuke's ambition to get stronger. He gave him the opportunity to get stronger, and he showed him how big the world really is. He put him on the path that he was on in the entirety of Shippuden. Without Orochimaru, there's no Sound 4. Without Sound 4, there's no development for Shikamaru. There's no development for Choji, Neji, Kiba. Nor is there development for Rock Lee, Naruto, who developed from having to go through and leaving everyone behind, putting the team together, finding niggas that he could trust, like Kankuro, Gaara, Tamari. All of these characters that were developed over the course of Shippuden because of these fights are no longer developed because of these fights. Because there's no Sound 4 without Orochimaru, literally. There's no Sound 4 without Orochimaru. Without the Sound 4, or rather, without Orochimaru, there's no curse mark. Feel me? There's no curse mark. There's no Naruto and Sasuke fighting for the first time. There's no, what did the curse mark do? Right, Kakashi had to seal it because Orochimaru forced that shit on Sasuke. But there's no curse mark. Feel me? And even the curse mark was how Orochimaru planned on being reborn before Itachi sealed him away. But Orochimaru put all of these things into motion. Granted, he wasn't the final villain, but he was probably the most important after Madara. Like, if my explanation does not convince you, then nothing will. But that's what I think. That's how I see Orochimaru. You know, without Orochimaru, the third Hokage never dies. He probably dies of old age. He doesn't die in battle, right? The village doesn't get attacked. They don't have to go and find Tsunade and she becomes Kage. Jiraiya doesn't return to the village. Naruto doesn't learn the summoning technique. Like, Naruto never meets Jiraiya and gets trained by him. Like, all of these things don't happen if Orochimaru doesn't infiltrate the Chunin exam with that fake team from the Land of Sound, which is his fucking country, or rather his land. He created the Land of Sound. But that doesn't happen. None of these things happen if he doesn't infiltrate the Chunin exam, if he doesn't whisper into Sasuke's ear. None of these things happen. That's why I have Orochimaru S tier. Even though, again, he ended up not even being the final villain, I put Orochimaru S tier. We already talked about Black. Talked about Black. I know this video is very lengthy. Damn, it's already an hour long. This video is very lengthy. I'm gonna put this out anyway just because I want to, but hey. Alright. Next we got Stain. So I have Stain in S tier because of the same reason of most of these guys in S tier. Now, his influence was massive. I mean, massive. So, although the League of Villains is the most prominent group of villains, a lot of the members of the League are there because they agreed with Stain, right? Although they misconstrued his views and his opinions, he had more of an influence on the League of Villains than Tomura does, or did. Now, Stain, he didn't have a plan. Here's Stain. Stain was a regular guy. He was just some guy sitting at home who got fed up with the way things were, and he decided to take it upon himself to personally change things. Now, the way and the methods that he used were extremely heavy-handed, and honestly, I can't really agree with them, but that was how he thought about it. He said, fuck that, I'm going all in on this shit. I'm going to kill people to get my point across because this society is corrupted. The way he saw it was that heroes were not legit, right? Because in their world, heroes receive compensation for their work. He thought that heroes should be altruistic and selfless the way they are in like Western comics. You know, you got like Superman. Superman doesn't get paid to save people, you know. And you got Spider-Man. Spider-Man doesn't get paid to save people. He doesn't make any money off of that. These niggas have day jobs. Feel me? They gotta pay bills like everybody else. They gotta maintain secret identities. They're not getting paid for what they're doing. They're basically just saving people as a hobby, right? They're heroes as a hobby. And the way Stain sees it, that's how heroes should be. And honestly, you can make that argument, because if you're saving people for a profit, then you're not really a hero. You know, you're kind of just like an officer. You know, you might as well be sanctioned by the government and licensed so that you can operate in tandem with like law enforcement and shit like that, because that's what you are if you're doing it for a profit. You know, you're not putting your life on the line for just to do it. You know, you're not doing it out of the goodness of your heart. And I honestly don't think most people would do that. Like, let's say people just randomly woke up one day and we all had superpowers. I don't think people would really be on some hero shit. You know, I really think people would just use their powers mainly for their own ends. You know, like if you compare it to the way the real world is, think about the real life. In the real life, people do things based off how they feel anyway. How would having powers be any different? Like if there were only a few people with powers, maybe, but that wouldn't be the case. In this case, this would be the case where everyone has powers, meaning like the world looks the same way except people have powers, right? All you're doing is just copy and pasting powers to all humans, but the world is still the same. The world is still as corrupt and still as fucked up as it is. How would having powers make it any different? It would probably make it worse, because if everybody had powers, then the world probably would have gotten blown up already. But like, think on the way the government sanctions things. Think on the way things happen. If you had powers, first off, you would be registered with the government. This wouldn't be some shit that you just had and was just living independently. I'm pretty sure it would be as the same as being a citizen. You know, everybody got an ID. Everybody has a social security number. Your powers would be the same. You have an ID, you have a social security number, and you probably have your power or your power type displayed on your ID card, so that the world would have some order. Because if everybody had powers and was wilding out, there would be no order, right? Of course, the most powerful people would still be in control. Of course, money would still be the most relevant thing. But I don't think people would be going out risking their asses to save complete strangers out of the goodness of their hearts. I think they would be doing it for a profit, because niggas still gotta make money. And people would be getting paid for this shit. This is what I'm saying. Like, if you get sanctioned by the government, then you're probably going to be turning a profit. You're probably going to have merch. You're probably going to have, like, fucking social media fame. Like, you know, a good example of this is The Boys. The series The Boys. If you are familiar with it, cool. If not, you should check it out. But The Boys is very, very close to how people would be wilding out and how the government would go about things and how close it would be to real life. Like, Boku is, like, realistic, but it ain't as close to real life as The Boys. But check out The Boys. You watch that, and ultimately you realize that Stain wasn't wrong. Like, the society that they live in is corrupt. You got heroes who do shit for profit. He consider, like, the only hero he acknowledges is All Might. All Might is the only hero he acknowledges, and understandably so, right? Because All Might does things in a way where, like, All Might doesn't get paid. He has no agency. He has no sidekicks. He just does his thing. He had one sidekick, and then that was it. And it was Night Eye. But he does his thing because it needs to be done. As simple as that. He does it just because it needs to be done. He does not look for profit. He does not look for recognition. He's just doing it because he's a hero, and that's what heroes do. That's how Stain sees things. So he went around killing people just because he needed to get his point across as quickly as possible. And it may suck, but the world responds to negativity about 100 times faster than it responds to positivity. So that's the method he chose to do things. And he had an influence not just on the villains, but he influenced heroes. He influenced the bystanders. He influenced the world. He opened the world's eyes, because now all of a sudden you got a bunch of people popping out that are thinking similarly to him. And you got a bunch of people popping out trying to make the same moves as him. You got people trying to emulate him suddenly. He suddenly becomes a cultural icon. That is why he's S tier. I'm getting tired of talking. I ain't even gonna hold you. So I'm not even about to go in on everybody else. Blackbeard, definitely S tier. He is possibly the main antagonist in One Piece. There's still no telling who the main antagonist is going to be, but it might be him. I think he's very important. I think he's very relevant. He had an influence on the whole series, right? He had a pretty decent plan. He wants to become Pirate King, and the way he goes about this, he finds a busted ass devil fruit. That shit was like beyond cheap. The Yami Yami no Mi. And he finds out that this fruit can somehow steal the abilities of others. Not only can it steal others' abilities and give them to himself, but he can take others' abilities and give them to other people. Still don't know how he does this, but his plan took about 20 or so years to come to fruition, and he stuck with it. He joined Whitebeard's crew, who was arguably the greatest pirate on the seas at the time. He learned everything that he could from him. He used his resources in order to make it easier for him to find his devil fruit. And then once he got it, he quickly rose to the ranks of the Shichibukai. He got government government certified, and then he ran up and impelled down. Or rather, he claimed the bounty on Ace because he knew that if he captured Ace, he would gain access to Impel Down. And also, Ace was like the biggest bounty he could have got his hands on reasonably at the time. So he knew that would give him the most attention that he needed, which is what he needed. He needed people to respect his shit, and people would respect him if he took down Ace. He takes down Ace, turns him into the government, and then he gets access to Impel Down, which was the next phase of his plan, because he needed a crew, and he only wanted the baddest of the bad. And who were those? The residents of Impel Down. So he basically pulls off a jail. Now, I don't think he planned for Luffy to try to break Ace out, but that shit did work to his advantage, and he made great use of that shit. And he ends up like letting out a whole bunch of ridiculously high level wanted pirates, and they all follow him. Why? Because he granted them their freedom. Why wouldn't they follow him? And they continue to follow him all the way to Marineford, which he also manipulated the events of, because he knew that if he captured Ace and if he turned him into the Marines, they would fucking execute him. And he knew that if they tried to execute him, Whitebeard would try to stop it forcefully. He planned, I swear, like, it feels like he foresaw all of these things happening, and he accommodated for each phase of this plan until he got to the ultimate goal of his, which was to steal Whitebeard's ability and to kill him and to take over all his territory, which he did. He shook up the pirate world in a way that no one has, because he's done something that no one else can or has done. He stole someone else's ability, and now he has two abilities. He became a Yonko pretty much overnight. He took over almost all of Whitebeard's territory pretty much overnight, and now he is one of the most wanted men in the world. And he's not done yet. The whole world knows his name. He is everyone's goal right now. Him and Kaido. He and Kaido are everyone's goals right now. That's why he's S tier. Griffith. Alright. Funny thing is, the first time I did this, I had a super lengthy explanation on Griffith. I'm not doing it again. Griffith is a piece of fucking shit. He's S tier just because he is in the process of accomplishing his goal, and because he is the biggest influence on a protagonist. He has about as big an influence on a protagonist as anyone in this list. Without Griffith, Guts does not lose an eye. Without Griffith, Guts does not get branded by the underworld and constantly hounded by demons. Without Griffith, Guts has no ambition to rid the world of demons. Without Griffith, Guts is just a sellsword whom never knows anything other than random fights. Again, I'm not about to talk about Griffith because I don't like Griffith. I got him in S tier just because. But if you want to hear my opinion on Griffith, you could probably talk to me. Hit up the comment section and ask me if you want to know. But I'm not talking about Griffith. Next, we got Aizen. Aizen is the main antagonist, or was the main antagonist, until they decided to keep writing, which they shouldn't have. Aizen was the main antagonist for Bleach. So Aizen is arguably like one of the best villains in anime, because one, he accomplished his goal, which was to fuse with the Hogyoku. He didn't accomplish his plan almost succeeded. He definitely ended up fusing with the Hogyoku, but he failed to become Spirit King. Now, Aizen is funny because he was playing the role of a good guy for about 200 years or some shit like that, and he had everyone convinced that he was a good guy, when really he was the big bad, but no one knew that. He was already he was the strongest nigga in his series, low key, because he played the role of like this really innocent and this like really quiet weeb type who just sat around and followed orders, and everybody loved him and everybody respected him because he was a really nice guy, and he was one of the oldest captains because, you know, he had been around for a really long time. He faked his own death because he wanted to be able to move around without eyes on him, and it worked, right? Because his experiment was to combine Soul Reaper power with Hollow power, because he wanted to reach a new level of existence. Again, he wanted to become the Soul King. That's basically the Hogyoku. Or rather, that's what the Hogyoku was. The Hogyoku was meant to transform him. So he actually managed to fuse with the Hogyoku, and he actually managed to like completely dupe everyone in Soul Society. He basically defeated Soul Society single-handedly because he had the Espada, but none of the Espada got any W's. Like, honestly, none of them. When you stop and think about it, not a single one of them won. There were 10 of them. 10 of them, they were all apparently captain level, and none of them could beat a captain. So Aizen ends up handling everything on his own, which worked out pretty well for him, honestly, because he was already stronger than everyone. You know? Sorry, I'm running out of gas. Like I said, I already did this video, so it's tough for me to talk about the same shit over and over again. But Aizen was cool. Like I said, Aizen's arguably, like, he's definitely, as you can see, he's top 5. Easily for me. His strength was unquestioned. His influence was ridiculous because, like, his influence was a quiet one, you know? But once he revealed himself as the villain, everyone did everything they could to defeat him, and nothing worked. It took Ichigo to basically become a god in order to beat him, and even then, the nigga didn't beat him. Like, Ichigo didn't successfully put him down. It was Kisuke who ended up winning that fight, honestly. You know? Kisuke was the one who had the plan. Kisuke was the one who sowed the seeds for Aizen's defeat. Kisuke was the only person that Aizen respected in the entire series, because Kisuke's intellect was the only intellect that Aizen needed to consider. No one else was even close to being as smart as he was. No one was even Slayer core was made because of Muzan. The entire story exists because of Muzan. Now, the main character, Tanjiro, his entire goal is to defeat Muzan. The person who put him on the path was Muzan. Muzan is the reason for the entire series, bro. No one is as important as he is. He's more important than the main character. It takes the entire series for them to be able to beat him. And even then, he almost single-handedly ends the entire Demon Slayer Corps. Because he was just that strong. He was that important. Imagine you got someone, right, whom has existed in the world and has not only plagued you, but has plagued your ancestors. Muzan was alive for that long that even Tanjiro's ancestors he had a hand in fucking with. He created an entire team of ridiculously powerful demons, the 12 Kizuki, and at any time he could just end them, right? He could end any of them at any time because none of them were stronger than he was. And demons aren't just like born out of nothing. No, these demons are people. These are all people that he personally turned into demons. He's out here making these moves. It's not like all these demons just came into existence and started following him. No, he's making them follow him. They have no choice. And they fear him because he has this weird thing where the demons can't speak his name because he places a curse on them. If they speak his name, because no one is allowed to know who he is, but if they speak his name, they die. Like they legit just die. They just explode. They are all subject to that curse. There was only like one demon that wasn't, and that was by means of Ichiro, rather Yoriichi. I always mix up his name with another character, but that was by way of Yoriichi. Right now, Yoriichi is the only person in the entire series who surpassed Muzan. He was so far ahead of Muzan that Muzan couldn't even stand in the same room as him. And Muzan was that much farther ahead of everybody else in the series. So what does that tell you about Ichiro? He was a god of the sword. He was a legitimate god. But unfortunately, he had a bad end. But the point is that Muzan was so powerful and so relevant that it took 1,000 years of culture to defeat him. An entire order of individuals dedicated to defeating him. An entire family dedicated to defeating him. Everything was like nothing mattered but Muzan. He never stopped being the focal point of the series. The series started with him and it ended with him. He is probably, honestly, he's a complete villain. He is a complete character. And the funny thing is, even Muzan had fear. They even like showed you like a bit of his humanization at the end, because Yaiba is easily one of the best series that has been written. Easily. It's in my hold. Pause there for my brother. Where was I? Let's talk about Muzan. Yeah, Muzan's a complete villain. He's good. We good. Now Madara. Madara is basically the same as Muzan. Like Muzan, you can tell Muzan got a lot of inspiration from Madara. Right? Madara may not be a demon, but he was a ninja. He lived a long time ago, hundreds of years ago. He had a plan, or rather he knew someone whom was like his best friend, which was Hashirama. Their relationship ended up deteriorating based off circumstance because they were on opposing sides in a war. They were friends, but they weren't allowed to be friends because their clans were at odds. And when the Hidden Leaf came to be, even though everyone knew who they were, Hashirama was chosen to be Hokage over Madara. And it was just like that was something that he wasn't really okay with. You know, so he snatches up the Kyuubi and he runs up on the village and he's just like, yeah, so this shit is mine now. But that doesn't work because Hashirama defeats him. And he knows that he won't be able to defeat Hashirama. So instead of trying to beat Hashirama, he decides to save his plan for a few centuries later. His plan was the infinite Tsukuyomi. Now, the infinite Tsukuyomi is pretty much exactly how it sounds. It's a Tsukuyomi that never ends. He puts the entire world in a dream state where they basically live out this fantasy life that they never awake from, and the only person who is in control of it is him. So he would basically effectively be a god. That was his plan. Now, the thing about this plan, he fucking succeeded. He pulled it off. He pulled off the infinite Tsukuyomi. He actually did it. Yeah, he lost, but he accomplished his goal. And this was a goal that he had to manipulate the events of to happen. Like, after he lost to Hashirama, he was done. He was supposed to die. But he managed to stay alive because Sharingan is fucking cheap. And he knew about the final technique to keep himself alive. Then he manages to manipulate events so that he meets Obito, and then he gets Obito to basically become his arms and legs, and Obito does all the work. But ultimately, it's still his plan. Obito is just a retainer, but it was his plan. Even when Obito tried to take over the plan for himself, he fucking failed. He tried to be the host of the Ten Tails, and he lost. Madara ended up becoming the Ten-Tailed host anyway. Madara ended up pulling off the infinite Tsukuyomi anyway. Even though Kaguya ended up body snatching him, that doesn't matter. You notice her face isn't here. I don't consider Kaguya relevant. She was just like there to be there. But Madara was that nigga. Like, he was so far ahead of everyone else that it wasn't fair that he was there. There were 5 fucking Kages involved in the 4th Great Ninja War, and he beat all of them by himself. How does that make sense to anyone? How is it that he's that much stronger? Now, you would think that the people in the present would be stronger than those from the past because they learned from them, but that's not ever the case. Like in anime, it's almost always that the fucking past and those from the past still surpass those in the present. That is Naruto. The only niggas who passed up like the old heads were Naruto and Sasuke, and they only did it in that last moment when Hagoromo gave them his power. But before that, the most relevant nigga was the nigga who was ancient history, fucking Madara. And then you got Hashirama, the first Hokage, who was considered, well, people say that Minato might have been greater than Hashirama, but Minato died when he was still young. Hashirama actually got to live a life. You know, like Hashirama was actually around. Hashirama got to reach his peak. Minato never got to reach his peak. If he would have, then yeah, Minato would have easily been the strongest Kage of the time. But again, he never got to reach that level. Who stopped that from happening? Madara. Madara was the reason for the entirety of Naruto. Like, he was the one who got the Kyuubi to attack the village, or rather Obito. But he was the one putting the battery in Obito's back. Without Madara, Obito dies under that fucking rock and is just a memory. Without Madara, there's no Akatsuki. Without Madara, there's no Kyuubi attacking the village and Minato having to sacrifice himself with Kushina because they just needed Kushina to be there too. There's no putting the fox inside Naruto. There's no Naruto. I don't think I need to say anymore. Last but not least. Last but certainly not least. Number 1 on this list, through and through, for me, Dio Brando. Now, Dio is my favorite antagonist in anime. I'll tell you why. Because he didn't have to do anything. His plan actually succeeded, and he wasn't even the one who succeeded it. That's how godlike he is. Someone else saw his plan through because they loved him that much, and they only wanted to, even if he wasn't able to see it, they wanted to complete his plan. So he enters the series as a kid who has nothing. He legitimately has nothing. Fucking his pops dies, and he's just like, yo, this guy, his name's I forgot Jonathan's father's name. The Joestar family, they owe me a debt, so go find them and hopefully they'll raise you. right? Because you have nothing. So he goes, he finds them, and it's just like, yeah, all right, cool. So these niggas is telling him, listen. No, or rather, he shows up to the motherfucking Joestar estate, and his first thought is, I'm finna make all of this shit mine. That's his first fucking thought. All of this is about to be mine. Not, oh, I'm so lucky to have this. Not, oh, I'm so glad these people took me in. Not, oh, I'm so glad to be off the street. Hell no. Not a humble thought in his brain. This nigga is like, oh yeah, this shit finna be mine. That was his first thought. Most people would be feeling like thankful to be in situations like that. Like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad these rich people took me in. I'm definitely gonna try and like make the most of this situation in a positive way. No, this nigga said, fuck this. These niggas are about to give me everything they got, whether they want to or not. Nobody has that much ambition coming from nothing in the fucking first chapter of a goddamn series. Right, so he pops out. He has the biggest influence on Jonathan that anyone can have. Jonathan is the protagonist at the time. No one had a greater influence on him than Dio. No one. Dio put him on the path of like learning how to fight and fucking learning Haman, meeting Erina and like becoming her husband, getting all ridiculously jacked, learning that the world is more than just sitting at a fucking table with tea and crumpets. Right? So he kills his father, basically outright, and Jonathan's just like, oh, fuck this nigga, like, I gotta take this nigga out, like, he killed my dad. So Dio was just like, yeah, whatever, you could try to kill me, but just know that I'm abandoning my humanity, Jojo. I am abandoning my humanity. And what does he do? He becomes a vampire with the stone mask that just happened to be there. So he becomes a vampire because he was the only one that noticed the stone mask lit up when blood touched it. So he uses it at first on someone else. He uses it on an innocent bystander. It kills the dude, and then it turns him into a vampire. And then that nigga almost kills Dio. Of course, Dio ended up overcoming the nigga. So he says, all right, bet. I know what I'm going to do. So after that, he puts on the mask himself. He abandons his humanity, and he becomes a vampire. Now, vampires in JoJo are basically ridiculously cheap. Like, they are the vampires you might be thinking of, but like times 1,000. Basically, just think of like a bunch of superhumans. And I mean like superhumans. I'm not talking like, oh yeah, we could like jump really high and run really fast. No, this nigga Dio, his strength, his physical strength got pushed to the point where he was walking up a stone wall by stomping holes in the shit and not falling. Yeah, it was like that. That nigga was strong as fuck after he became a vampire. So he becomes a vampire and still ended up losing to Jonathan, right? Because, you know, protagonist. Excuse me. But even though he lost to Jonathan, Jonathan didn't kill him, so he ended up coming back. He came back, and then Jonathan had no choice but to get stronger to defeat him. He ended up meeting Baron Zeppeli. He ended up learning Haman. And, you know, he ended up on the path of the warrior. That was because of Dio. Without Dio, there is no Jonathan. Without Dio, there is no Joestar bloodline. So, him and Jonathan get into it. Jonathan ends up cutting off his head. What happens? Dio loses. Cool. Whatever. That's fine. Jump forward 100 years later. Dio returns. How does he return? Because at the end of the fucking series, even though Jonathan cut his head off, he didn't kill him. And he ended up smuggling himself on the boat with Jonathan on his wedding day. And he kills him. He killed him. That was how the series ended. Dio fucking won. Because he killed Jonathan. So he kills Jonathan, and what does he do? He somehow, some way, attaches his head to Jonathan's body. That was his goal, because Jonathan destroyed his body. Like, all Dio had was a head. So he's like, yo, Jonathan, you're the only man that I ever respected in this life. You are literally the only man that I've ever respected. If there is anyone whose body deserves to be snatched by me, it's you. That was how he justified it. So he snatched that nigga's body, and that was it. Next thing you know, Dio is technically a Joestar. And he continued to live. He lives on. He popped out 100 years later and continues to plague the Joestar family. Except this time, now he's dealing with Jotaro and Joseph. Now, Joseph is Jonathan's grandson. Jotaro is Joseph's grandson. That is 2 generations. No, that's 3 generations of Joestars. That is 3 generations of Joestars directly in contact with Dio. That's 3 generations of protagonists, my nigga. Are you listening? That's 3 generations of protagonists that this nigga has had influence over, and it don't stop there. Part 5 of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is about his son. That's 4 generations. He might not be the villain, but his son is the fucking protagonist. I don't know how much more influence. Like, I don't see how his influence isn't still recognized there. And then last but not least, part 6, which is where they basically ended JoJo as it was known, and they restarted it. Well, part 6 was Pucci, Father Pucci, who was Dio's best friend, following Dio's plan to the letter. Because what was Dio's plan? His plan was not to just rule the world anymore. Nah, not at all. His plan was to restart the world and rule over it as the only person who realized that the world was different. How was he going to do that? Simple. He needed to find what did he need to find? He needed to find a certain ability. He needed a certain stand ability that already existed in the world, but he had to find it. Or rather, he had to wait for it to be developed. So he had to find a certain stand ability. Then he needed to wait a certain amount of time. He needed the fucking planet to be aligned in a certain way. This was a super complex plan, but the plan was going to end up as such that he was going to use his ability to accelerate the flow of time in the world, and he was going to accelerate it to the point where the world would keep spinning and keep spinning and keep spinning, and eventually it would reach light speed, and the universe would reset, or rather the world would reset. That was his plan. It may sound complicated, but like, that's JoJo logic. That's honestly JoJo logic. He fucking pulls this shit off. Well, Pucci pulled it off for Dio. Dio might not have been the one to do it, but he directly influenced Pucci. Not to mention, Pucci had I think he had Dio's bone. He had one of his bones or some shit like that. So he was somehow still in series. He might not have been there physically, but he was there spiritually. It was his plan. And the funny thing was, the world that Pucci had reset, Dio existed in, but Pucci didn't manage to get to him. Now, Pucci won, but he forgot about one thing, which is typically what happens with these JoJo villains. They usually get like right there. They right there at the end, but then they overlook one minor fucking detail, and that's what ends them. Because that's what Pucci did. He overlooked one minor detail, and that's how he lost. He overlooked a fucking child. But Dio's influence stretched over 5 fucking generations of protagonists. Dio was basically the main antagonist of JoJo the entire time. They took a break from using Dio's influence with Part 4, and Part 4 is probably one of the least popular, if not the least popular version of JoJo, because there's no Dio. Part 2 is cool, but Joseph is what makes Part 2. Josuke is no Joseph, even though that's his father. And yeah, that's everything. That is my tier list. Everything explained. The image will be the way it is at the start, so you don't gotta watch the whole video if you don't want to. I'll try to put timestamps and shit so you could just skip to when I'm talking about who, but this is a long ass recording anyway. What is this shit? Damn, 2 hours. I'm probably not even, this is gonna be a long ass video to upload. But yeah, man, if you actually watch this whole video, shout outs to you. Sorry it's as long as it is. I tried to make it much shorter. I'm gonna upload this anyway. Nobody, people probably won't watch it, but I'm just glad I did it. I'm gonna do more tier lists like this, but I'm gonna get better at shortening them, because I'm not gonna go into like these super long and lengthy explanations like I did for this one. I just want to do this for the first time around, just to see how it felt. So yeah, man, it's your man Ninja Dan signing off for this first tier list. I got some more on the way. Like I said, I'm just gonna have a tier list series, and yeah. If you did enjoy this, and if you actually did watch it the whole way through, leave a like on the video. Hit that comment section if you have your own opinions and shit that you want to share, and subscribe to the channel if you are new, and if you want to see the optimized tier list once we get to that point, because this ain't the optimized tier list. This is just the first one. Yeah. All that being said, it's a dangerous world out there, but so are you.